what is a critical distance.
And you'll see that in UFC too. You'll see guys that get a little bit too overwhelmed. Sometimes they'll try and play the outside, try and keep a little distance and dance around.
One of the things that we regret not doing was looking at who dominates the center.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who spends that time more in the center and makes people run further.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's potentially a future study there. I think is, you know, if it is dominating the center that makes a difference and tires the opponent out. Can we design coaching environments where we reward that? Maybe we have a circle within the, you're trying to get dominance of that circle or something. You just tape it on the floor. And if you can get in there, then you don't leave it. You know, can I force my way into there?
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, it's like boxing, I guess, isn't it? You dominate the center of the ring, or
boxing and kickboxing. That's an established principle. Well, I mean, that's the conventional wisdom. I don't know that there's any research.
I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I'm
right.
actually neither. So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, like you can see in the boxers when they get tired, they'll go in and just grapple, won't they, and just try and lean on each other to get a rest or whatever. So I think it's fascinating. And it's nice that these studies were done, because we get often criticized that this approach only works with team games or individual games. So one of our key goals really is to demonstrate that constraints can apply to absolutely everything. And on the website that we created, the Constraint Collective, we've deliberately started off with interviews with people in canoeing, in athletics, and in equestrian. Is our next one's in equestrian. So we've deliberately gone away from the team games to try and sort of show and we got a book coming out. I think it might be out actually on figure skating.
Oh wow!
It's an American coach who got in touch with Keith Davids, and we've developed a book out, the series on figure skating, and hopefully there's one on swimming to come. And then Rob Gray is going to do one on baseball, so that's pretty cool.
Excellent. Yeah, I like baseball. Yeah. So along those lines, we've kind of touched on what it means to use the constraints-led approach kind of broadly by talking about Taekwondo and how the way you design the environment affects the way that they actually spar or fight. Can you contrast what the typical information processing approaches you've seen, how that differs from constraints-led approach?
I guess in combat sports, so Dominic Ortho, I don't know if you've come across his work, he's a judo player, and he's very, very bright boy, and he didn't do his PhD or his master's or his PhD actually in judo, but we'd have these discussions about what practice looked like, and I guess one of the typical things we would do is this. He would talk about was practicing the move in judo, you know, and that often involved half throwing somebody, which I always thought was quite funny. So we practice, doing this, and then we eventually throw them over. But that meant we decompose the task into parts. We teach part of it, and then we try and then put the whole back together. But for me, that was significantly problematic, because if somebody wants to throw me over the shoulder, I think I might resist. So therefore, the way that I'm going to create instability and get them off their feet is going to be different than if they're helping me throw them over. So my question there is, what use is that? How useful is it to have somebody helping you throw them rather than resisting throwing them, which would require, I guess, a whole series of different ways of moving them around and creating instability, and your footwork would be different, and so on and so on. So that would be for me, that would be a typical approach from if you want to call it an information processing approach, where we break these the activities down into their component parts. We focus on the individual really, rather than the whole system and the environment that affects that. Whereas in a constraint-led approach, we really want to try and use ideas around keeping it as real as you can, if at all possible. And so we developed, or we built on the ideas of Brunswick, and I guess a lot of the ideas around transfer of representative, what Ross Pinder we call representative learning design. How, and I just sort of coined the phrase really, does it look and feel like the real thing? So in the case of teaching that particular throw, what could I do to help the person learn the whole movement? If somebody is resisting, could I simplify the task? And I'm just making this up off the top of my head, so you might go, no, that's rubbish, which is fine. But maybe if I'm helping somebody to learn this move to start with, I'll give them a smaller and lighter person to have to throw, to just help them get the feel of that, and then obviously over time begin to match that more to the people who are in their weight category or belt or whatever it is. So the idea of representative design gets coaches to think about, how does this look and feel like the real thing? And it doesn't mean it has to. So we developed an idea of a dial, so the real thing would be 10 out of 10. But I've developed a sort of a coding system based around almost like a traffic light system. If it was red, it was 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, and therefore you're completely breaking down the perception action couplings. And if you're going in there, you've got to have a really good reason for doing it. You might, but I guess the example from baseball would be ridiculous activities like T-ball, where we're learning to hit a ball off a tee rather than learning to hit a moving ball that's coming towards us. So I would give that a 1, and absolutely pointless in trying to develop the timing of your swing with a ball moving towards you. So there's that would be an example. I don't know what it would be in Taekwondo. What would you give a 1? Shadow fighting, maybe fighting against Casper.
Probably like a form, like a prearranged set of movements in the air, which is basically shadow fighting's kind of that, but it's more you just create the movements.
So usually the intention is the most important thing that shapes the way that you move, isn't it? So if I'm move, I guess things like fighting against a pad, or trying to kick a static bag or something like that, would be an example of breaking it down. You might argue that is useful. I don't know what you'd give that out of 10, but guess what we want is to try and get the coach to at least think about it, and then see if they could squeeze it a little bit more towards the 10. But understand that 5 can be fine, or 6 can be fine, or whatever, but that you will lose certain information if you're doing that. It'd be like using a pitching machine in baseball. There's a pitching machine's coming at you, so we've got the ball traveling towards us, which is a good thing, but we're losing all the cues from the pitcher. And if I don't know what baseball pitching machines, whether they actually use a real ball or whether you use a rubber. In cricket, you use a ball that's not got all the markings of the seam markings that a ball would have, and that's really useful and important information that helps you work out which way it's going to swerve or swing in the air. If baseball is done with a real ball, I guess, and we know, I think Blundell did some work where we know that the seam actually gives you information about which way it's spinning. So if there's a ball without a seam, then you're losing critical information that will help you inform. So that's sort of approach really. We're looking at trying to make the task not prescribe the solution as much, but help them, give them a general intent. We want you to score points by hitting, punching, kicking this area of your body or whatever in
Mhm.
Taekwondo. But I'm not necessarily going to prescribe how to do that. But we're going to invite you to find solutions and find ways that work for you, I guess. And that would mean adding a lot more variability into practice.
Right.
So it might mean fighting people who with different limb lengths or
Mhm.
different heights or different action capabilities in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, and then exploring how you would find a way of beating that person, I guess. So adding a lot more variability into practice rather than
Mhm.
for different reasons than the sort of motor programming idea of that variability there is to create parameters where the program can be created into a schema, blah blah blah, whereas ours is all about finding lots of different solutions to solve the problem,
Excellent.
put simply, I guess.
Yeah.
or,
No, I think
or
that's
maybe
a
not simply.
that's a good overview. Well, the thing with the constraints-led approach is that no matter how simply you put it, it's just a different way of different way of thinking
Yeah,
about it. And
yeah,
you're never going to get past the fact that it's just a different way of thinking about it. So people have to have, I know I had to have repetitions of hearing people talk about it from different
yeah,
perspectives
yeah.
in different ways until I really, really began to understand it. Um, and
That's a really good point. So even in learning, we need more variability. We need to see it from different angles
yeah, you
and
do.
come at it. I hadn't thought about it like that, but that's
Yeah.
a really cool idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I have an ed psych background, so that's how that applies. That's how constraints-led approach applies to that, I guess.
It sort of reminded me of when they interview witnesses at an incident, don't they, with
Mhm.
cognitive, what do they call it, cognitive restructuring or whatever, in interviews where they get them to tell the story but start at different points each time.
Yeah.
So that seems to help you create better memories of what's gone on. So
And
that
and if you're not remembering a real event, you will change important details that shouldn't change. Like
okay, yeah, yeah,
if you're recalling, sometimes unimportant details you'll change those, but big details, especially details that are related to salience,
yeah, yeah.
emotional salience, you don't
Well,
typically change those.
that's where my brain just went to. There is in terms of emotion,
Mhm.
and often when really important emotion, it plays a significant part of learning, doesn't it? And when we're emotionally engaged in something, then we change our intentions, we change what we're thinking, but we also change what we see in the world, or what we're looking for, what we
Mhm.
see, but also then the way that we move. So if you're fighting when you're incredibly nervous, you're going to move differently than if you're
Yeah.
on top of it and thinking. So we really do need to create emotions. That's part of the representative learning design
Yeah.
and John Hedrick's work on affective learning design,
Mhm.
where we're trying to create opportunities to experience the emotions that you would get in a fight.
Mhm.
And of course, because it's dynamic, they're going to change all the way through the fight.
Absolutely.
And by not by osmosis, but by experiencing that, you begin to know yourself better,
Mhm.
and know then how to, the coach then can help you sort of embrace emotions rather than remove them, or
Yeah.
acknowledge they're there.
There's energy management is a really big thing in combat. I mean, it's a big thing across sports.
Yeah,
And your level of the level of arousal you're at dictates, I think, how much adrenaline you have in your system. And
yeah,
depending on what state your system is in, you are tapping different energy systems. So if you are too nervous in a competition, you're gonna expend that energy too quickly, and you're not going to be able to recover. And that's going to create a vicious cycle with your psychological state.